Hey, everybody. I'm John Kraska, Executive Director for Every Library and the Every Library Institute. It is Thursday, February 13th. We're right at the second half of Library Lovers Week. Library Lovers Week 2025 is intended to be a joyful celebration of libraries in a time that this year is particularly fraught for libraries. We are trying to spend some time talking about the joy of writing with some wonderful authors. We started on Tuesday. We've had several great conversations already. We're going all the way through Friday night. Valentine's Day itself, Library Lovers Day, technically, to talk about the joy of writing, the culture of reading in this country, and libraries in general. There's a lot of headlines about censorship and book bans. There's a lot of real problems happening out there that restrict the right to read and go after readers individually and librarians too. We want to do more than just. It's exhausting. It's tiring. There's a huge fight happening. So we're also hoping to help change the headlines, which is why we're having this Library Lovers Week conversation. Every Library, as your host, is the political action committee for libraries. We work on positive campaigns like library ballot measures that fund libraries, legislation in many states that are advancing the right to read, protecting and safeguarding libraries. We also do that anti-censorship, anti-book ban, anti-discrimination work in many places around the country, and we are a donor-supported organization, which means that I have to put up a thing on the screen that asks you for donations. We're looking for donors, $3 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. If you do, we will put your funding to work supporting libraries and fighting these bad fights. We will also send you a sticker of your choice. And these stickers are vetted and approved by a large group of library lovers who think they're cute as heck. I'm old enough, and I say this every night, to put the sticker on my jean jacket from the 1980s or my water bottle. You can put it wherever you like, as long as you're sharing the love. Go to libraryloversweek.org. I'll put it on the screen here. libraryloversweek.org. Start your monthly donation, get a sticker, and help us help libraries succeed. All right, I need to do a little bit of digital work here and get Chris and Joe in and do some intros and have a big chat. Like I said before, about writing and about reading and about libraries. I'm really thrilled today to be with Chris and Joe. Christopher Bollen is the acclaimed author of The Lost Americans and A Beautiful Crime. He brings his sharp eye for atmospheric suspense to HAVOC, which is on sale right now, a twisty psychological thriller about secrets, meddling, and a luxurious hotel with a dark side. Chris, thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
It's a treat. And then Joseph Finder, the New York Times bestselling author of House on Fire and Suspicion, returns with The Oligarch's Daughter, which is a great title. That thing came into my house. I was like, oh, I got to grab that in this present moment. It's a gripping thriller that blends the high-stakes intrigue of Succession with the covert drama of The Americans. Joe, thanks for taking some time tonight, too.
It's great to be here. Great to talk to you.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we were in the green room ahead of time. Joe, I know you're in Boston. You're freezing. I'm in suburban Chicago. I'm freezing. But Chris is in Venice, Italy. Chris, you got to tell us all about why.
Don't feel too sorry for me. I'm here on a writing residency. It's something called the Emily Harvey Foundation. They've been kind enough to give me a apartment for 2 months, and I'm taking full advantage, writing another novel outside of the United States. So it's been fun.
I can imagine. Yeah. What a lovely time to be in Venice. It says
yes.
It says every week of the year. So
I bought a lot of glass.
Mm-hmm. And Joe, you've been on the road doing book tours, you were telling me?
Yeah. Just got back from a 10-city tour.
Any highlights for you?
I did a great event with Michael Connolly and CJ Box in Tampa, which was terrifically well attended and a hell of a lot of fun. And I did another event with Karen Slaughter and MK Andrews in Woodbridge outside of Atlanta. So I've done a number of events with other authors, which I really like.
That's fun. That's fun. Okay, so speaking of other authors, you both are thriller writers. You build suspense, I think, in very different ways, though. Joseph, it's high stakes espionage, it's corporate intrigue. Chris, it's character driven literary mysteries. can I ask you both how you define what makes a great thriller for you individually as an author? And let me start with you, Chris. You've been on reflection period here now, with your fellowship. What motivates you as a writer of thrillers?
Well, I was just reading Joe's book, the Oligarch's Daughter, and the beginning, the first chapters just snap you right into the story. And I feel like that's a huge element of writing thrillers is I don't think of it, as a separate genre entirely from literature, which is, its own genre in a way. But I think that there are some elements that make a thriller, really there are pieces of thrillers that only happen in those books, and that's they really grab you from the start. They pull you into a story, and you kind of have to keep the pacing going of it. It's kind of it's a trick of the writer to keep the story always alive and sort of like on one foot. So for me, it's always just trying to make a meaning and make characters, but also keep the reader kind of moving quickly through the pages.
Yeah, Joe, is there a pace or a cadence, or what does it get your own heart pounding?
It does, yeah. Thank you, Chris. Pace is really important. I also think, and this is something that Chris can talk about, characters are super important in thrillers. I mean, you've got to have characterization that is deep enough and plausible enough that the reader is involved. The reader feels some claim on the narrative.
Well, there's a lot of respect that it takes to write for a reader,
Yeah.
And not taking them for granted, but also not pandering to them.
Right. I assume my readers are very smart and they've read a lot of other thrillers. And they know all the tricks. And so we need to sort of come up with the tricks that they haven't seen before.
So, are you, if I may, Joe, are you a writer who looks at the blank screen or the blank page if you're and knows what he's going to be doing that day, or are you letting this thing take you where it takes you?
Well, I do both. I sort of outline the first maybe 20% of the book, just so I can sort of get situated, get my character situation figured out, and once I go past the 20% mark, I then sort of let it rip and just sort of write whatever comes to me. And my feeling is that if you surprise yourself, you can surprise the reader.
Oh, that's really interesting. I like that. The idea that at a certain point it has its own momentum.
Right.
That's real cool.
Yeah.
Chris, you and Joe both have very much place as a character in your books. I mean, you're in one of the most character-y places right now in Venice. I mean, how do you use settings like that to motivate your story along?
Actually, for most all of my books, setting is where I begin. So much of the story for me comes out of the place. I usually have in mind a place first and maybe one character. And from that sort of interaction between character and place, it all builds. So for me, the geography is everything. And usually I have to fall in love with the place myself in order to want to write about it. But there also has to be something I can't quite figure out about the place. There have been cities I've gone to and traveled to, and I thought, I'm going to write a book there. And then I go and I spend a week there, and it's a wonderful place, beautiful, had a great time, but I just didn't feel a frisson with it. I didn't think there was something wrong or something, that was complex that would make for an exciting locale. So it's this funny feeling I get in places. Venice, I wrote about once. HAVOC is Luxor. I've done Cairo. These are mysterious places, and so I don't know. I gravitate toward those kind of strange, unresolved climates.
Well, a place like Cairo, a place like Venice, it's not like you're writing about a new subdivision in suburban Omaha. These are places that they have a richness to it. You turn a corner, you're in a different part of history, let alone a different part of the terroir.
Yes, there's so many cities within these cities. You know, they're a bit like New York that way. The difficulty of that, and Henry James alluded to this with Venice, is that there are also cities that have been used so many times in previous books. So you really have to also find like a new way to describe the Grand Canal, which is not easy because so many greats have done it before you. So, you know, it's a challenge also to write these places sensitively. You don't want to steamroll over them. You want to give them nuance, but you also want to find a new way in, you know, so
Yeah.
it's a tightrope.
Well, both of you, talking about a new way in. I want to take a minute and talk about your books a little bit more, if I could. I want to hit you up first about HAVOC, Chris, and then The Oligarch's Daughter, Joe. So take us through what readers should be looking forward to, not expecting. I don't want to give anybody spoilers.
Yeah, well, it's a very strange book. It surprised even me, talking about, as Joe said, about surprising yourself. It's about an 81-year-old woman who is sort of living out of hotels, and for various, perhaps nefarious reasons, she ends up at this old hotel in Luxor, which was based, I feel bad saying it, but it was based on this amazing hotel called the Winter Palace, which is where Agatha Christie wrote parts of Death on the Nile, and Tutankhamun's tomb was announced from the steps. I mean, it has a history. I just used that because it's this beautiful old hotel. But she's staying there, and she soon meets this 8-year-old boy who she thinks of as sort of a like-minded soul, but they quickly turn into enemies, and basically it ramps up until they basically try to kill each other. And I have to say, John, it came out of the pandemic because of the whole idea of, do we sacrifice the young for the old or the old for the young? And I felt like there was this moment, and maybe the first time I had clocked it, where the two bookend generations were sort of at war with each other. I mean, you know, and so I just literalized that basically, and put these sort of an 81-year-old and 8-year-old in sort of nemesis territory.
Yeah, it was an intriguing thing. I thought about Harold and Maude, but in like an antimatter version of it at one point.
Exactly. There's a lot of great, and I love Harold and Maude stories of a happy relationship between the old and the young, but this is not one of them.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I love it. So, Joe, let me jump back into The Oligarch's Daughter though for a minute. You know, again, the question about what should readers be looking forward to there?
Yeah. Well, so this is a chase novel and a love story both. It is the story of a regular American guy who falls in love with the daughter of a Russian oligarch without knowing at first she is the daughter of a Russian oligarch. And then American intelligence takes an interest in our hero and pressures him to start reporting back on his father-in-law. And he realizes if he is caught doing this, he is totally screwed. If he doesn't do it, he's screwed. So that's kind of like this trap that sets up the novel.
You know, it's hard to be married. And it's even harder when Uncle Sam wants you to rat out your father-in-law.
Especially if your father-in-law is a Russian oligarch.
Right, yes. So, I mean, when you talk about a morally complex situation, that's at the heart of a thriller. I mean, the morally complex situation, the flawed and yet relatable part of it, Joe, you know? How do you approach something that, I mean, there are a number of Russian oligarchs, but how many of us ever stray into a love affair with one of their daughters? I mean, putting yourself in that position, unless this is a true story, and I don't know your biography very well.
Not a true story, no. Yeah. No, this is sort of my way. I sort of think of these oligarchs as being merchant princes, really. They came to the West and they took over London. London became a London grad. And a lot of real estate in Manhattan was bought up by oligarchs. Mansions, yachts, private jets. And they also began to donate philanthropically to museums and hospitals and schools. And the Tate, for example, the Tate Museum has a building named after one of the oligarchs, for instance.
I wasn't aware of that. Okay.
Yeah. And so for me, I was working on this book while the Russians invaded Ukraine. And I thought, oh, crap, that's the end of this book. Because all of a sudden the Russian oligarchs were sanctioned, their yachts were seized,
Sure.
they were scurrying back to Moscow. And until I realized that if I wrote a book that had two timelines, one before the war happens and one during, it would sort of make the situation richer and deeper and kind of more interesting, really.
The tension on that timeline is certainly a. I mean, what do people know about themselves, and when do they know it? That allows you to really explore some of those character evolution moments, I think.
Yeah, and I wanted the reader to be in Paul's situation and think, what would I do in this case? And is he being dishonest and dishonorable to his girlfriend and then wife? Is he being dishonest and dishonorable to his father-in-law, the Russian oligarch, who we don't necessarily dislike? I mean, the oligarch is his name is Arkady, and he is a jovial, family-centric guy with a kind of a sinister edge to him. And I want the reader to not know what to make of him, really.
That's very interesting. The moral complexity and the moral ambiguity. Chris, let me come back to you with that. The morally complex situation. I mean, you have people who move from, you run into somebody on a cruise ship. You spend a little time in a pension with them. You know, you're on a bus trip or you're on an airplane. You usually don't end up wanting to murder them right away.
Right. Well, most of us don't.
Most of us, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the excitement of writing about strangers or places where strangers interact. It's like I was watching this documentary about, I think it was like in medieval Germany, and in a small town, if someone was famously a snitch or something, they would put this gigantic helmet on their head with a bell, and that they would have to wear around. But you know, when you're on vacation, people come with it with no history, so you know, they can sort of recreate themselves from scratch, and so you kind of trust them, or based on what they present themselves as being, you take that for fact. And of course, that's a great terrain as a writer to manipulate expectations and so yeah, the character. I really enjoyed talking about whether something comes from life or not. My previous novels, I'd always sort of written characters roughly my own age, roughly my own socioeconomic background. But with Maggie, this 81-year-old woman, she was wildly different from me, externally, but it gave me so much freedom. Instead of write what you know, I felt so much freedom not writing what I knew and jumping into the head of a totally different character. And that just allowed me so much room to create and write a story that would be hemmed in a bit more if I had to pick a 40-year-old man, going there. And also, I think writing about an old person is wonderful because they've earned their wisdom. And as a writer, you often think, does this 23-year-old really know the world in the way that I'm giving them the words to speak? So with an 81-year-old, yes, they absolutely have enough life experience to share all these ideas that you want to put into the character. So that was a lot of fun.
Is it an anachronism when you have a smartwatch in the 1830s? Isn't that right to say? Yes. I mean, there's a certain the 23-year-old dialogue might be anachronistic because you're a 40-something writing it. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it was hard to write. The other side of the coin was an 8-year-old, and it was very hard to write an 8-year-old authentically as an 8-year-old because you always want to shove a precocious, a 30-year-old man inside of an 8-year-old's body and make him, sort of ready to go to Harvard. But you want to have a child who's a child. And so, getting into those different characters is really important. And also, I just love outsiders. I mean, I'm always writing about outsiders. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting observation. Let me ask you both, as experts in your field, where's the thriller genre at these days? We've had some wonderful other authors on this week talking about romance or romance thrillers or mystery. I mean, you're not the first person to bring up Agatha Christie, by the way. What's the state of the thriller genre right now, in your opinion?
That's a tough one. Well, there are a lot more women writing thrillers, which I think is great, than was the case 20 years ago. There is a lot more romance in thrillers now. I think basically this is influenced by the rise of this semi-genre romantasy, romance plus fantasy, which involves dragons.
Okay.
And so I think that has sort of influenced the genre. I think also thrillers have become more character driven because we're doing something that you can't do on TV or in the movies. I mean, you can do great action scenes in movies or on TV. You can't get into the character's head, but that is our superpower. We can get into the character's head, and I think thrillers, books that is, have exploited that a lot more.
It's interesting because so one of my younger brothers works in the film business. He does audio, for film. He's moving his way through his career, and at one point earlier in his career, he had a critique about the action adventure, which basically was that if you want the audience to be more excited, you turn up the volume. And by turning up the volume, you lose some nuance. You can't get in the character's head if all you have is explosions going on.
Right, that's right. And it's boring, frankly. I mean, when you write an action scene, which I've done a number of times, you need to give the audience a rest after that. There has to be kind of a contemplative scene afterward to let the reader recover.
That is very true. They're like, it just is unrelenting sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Chris, when you're looking at the evolution of the genre and also the publishing space around thrillers, what are you seeing these days?
What I'm seeing that I find really interesting is I think because we're in such a strange place with literature, I think a lot of literary writers are sort of turning to the thriller and trying their hand at something with more plot and pace. And I don't know if it's a commercial interest, sort of like, because everyone's worried about sales and the death of the book, or it's just a general love and excitement for the genre. And so I think, I hate to attribute it purely to commercial reasons, but I think more than that, I think it's a blending of genres. I think people from different fields are trying to figure out if it's something that they can write and work with. And so I think it's actually a really fruitful time when it's sort of opening up in so many different ways. So many people are, as Joe said, a lot of women are writing about it. A lot of people from other groups, I think there's a lot of gay thriller writers right now that are really exciting. So I don't know, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's like it's almost generational. New generations discover genres and try to take them into, in different ways. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But
I think that there's a real creative energy to that. And I appreciate you both sharing those insights.
I just want to say that Joe is so right, though, about pacing of like an action sequence to giving the reader a rest. I think it's almost a bit like orchestrating music. When the flow and when you need to go soft and when you need to go hard, and it really becomes almost like a sensory experience of feeling a book's plot.
So that book, the author to reader pipeline, has a lot of steps in it. The author to reader pipeline's you've got your editor, hopefully, it's a good collaboration. You've got your publisher side of things. You've got your bookseller and your library in there. I want to check in with you. It's Library Lovers Week, as we mentioned before. I should probably put up the commercial crawl about donations, by the way, at libraryloversweek.org, because I want to hear what you guys think about meeting people at the library, being part of that library conversation. And I do want to also ask you if you have a library or librarian story. Some people have librarian stories, like it's a placemaking thing for them. Or they have librarians in their lives. It's Library Lovers Week. You guys are on the hook for a good anecdote here. So
I'll tell you one.
Yeah, I'd love one.
If I may jump in.
Yeah.
Okay. I became a writer because of a librarian.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was a kid in Albany, New York, and I used to go to the Albany Public Library. And I was looking for books I hadn't read before. And I'd read A Wrinkle in Time. I loved that. And I'd read books similar to that. And this woman pointed me in the direction of a book by Eleanor Cameron called The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet, about two 10-year-old boys who build a rocket ship under the instruction of an old wizened man and are able to fly into space. Anyway, I loved this book. I turned my friends onto it, and I wrote a letter to the author, Eleanor Cameron. And in those days, there were no websites. You just sent a letter off to Little Brown in Boston. And months later, I got a reply, a form letter, but it had her return address on it. So I sent her a letter. I said, "You didn't answer any of my questions." She answered back in a 2-page, single-spaced typed letter.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote back to her, and this went back and forth over several years. We were like pen pals. And that was when I realized that behind every novel is a human being making these narrative decisions. And I thought, what a cool job this is.
Yeah.
So that's when I decided I want to be a writer.
That's great. That's great.
So the Albany Public Library.
And there's something kind of beautiful about thinking about that intern or that administrative assistant at Little Brown being like, "Oh, we'll put this one in the pile," and you're like, "No, I'm not. I'm going all the way in. I deserve answers."
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, is it a library place or a librarian person?
It would be a place. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I went to the Hyde Park Public Library, which was in my neighborhood, as a kid. And I too, I think, really decided I wanted to be a writer from all of the time I spent in the stacks of that library, particularly as a young kid trying to be an adult and trying to read adult books and books beyond my age. And because it's such a free place. I mean, probably the conservatives amongst us don't want to hear about that. But to me, it was like it was a liberation, libraries. And so I was just listening to an old Howard Bloom just today, a lecture. And he was talking about why we should read. And it was like, because you can't meet enough people yourself in your own life. And it's one of the few places that allows you the intimacy of people. And a book does. And that's so true. I mean, you don't really learn about another person as well as you do a character in a book and what, of their human sides. And so I really believe that. And so, to me, it was just this magical place, the library. So like Joe, it's where I kind of got my start as wanting and dreaming about being a writer.
I love it. I love it. The idea that there is a level playing field for people to come in. There's no fear, no favor around it. There's a lot more than just one or two or three ideas on the shelf. I mean, Chris, do you read? I'm sorry. Writers tend to be readers. You sound like you're a big reader. Do you read within your outside of your genre? Do you just love reading thrillers?
Oh yeah, no, I know. I read all sorts of things. I read completely outside of my genre. I was just reading The Ambassadors, to go back to Henry James. I think it's because of Venice. I read everything, and I don't make a distinction between genres. I think it's the same test of a sentence, no matter what book you have. If it's a great sentence, I'm excited and keep reading. And if I don't, if I find it dead, whatever genre it's in, I don't want to read it. So
I'm not putting you on the spot here, but is that your phrase or is that somebody else? The test of a sentence?
No, that's my phrase. I think.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I love it. I love it. Put that on a T-shirt.
Oh yeah, a sticker at least.
Yes, a sticker. That's a good idea. Joe, are you voracious? Are you dedicated?
I read a lot.
Yeah.
Read a lot. Yeah. I tend to read. I read a lot of thrillers. First of all, I want to know what my colleagues are up to.
Sure.
But I also read a lot of novels, literary novels about families. I came from a family of 7, and I'm sort of fascinated by the dynamics. My younger brother is my first reader, for instance, right now.
Okay.
So the influence of family on someone's life is important to me. So I tend to read literature about families.
Mm-hmm. That's not anything I would have guessed, but at the same time, when I think about The Oligarch's Daughter as very much a story about the intentional family. It's not family of origin,
right?
The loyalty of the family of orientation. That makes sense.
Yeah, and our hero Paul doesn't just fall in love with Tatiana; he falls in love with her family, which is the sort of boisterous Russian family. Very warm, and he comes from a very cold place. Paul does, where his father was half crazy, his mother died when he was young, and it was cold and lonely, and he's just so attracted to this Tatiana's family, and that's an important. The family is a character in the book, frankly. That's
really interesting, Joe. I appreciate you sharing that. We are turning the corner towards the end, gentlemen, and I want to ask you for some advice and support for people who are aspiring writers, whether it's in your genre or their own approach to things. I always like asking good talkers like yourselves this piece of advice. I could have asked you about who do you want to play the main character in the movie version. No, I want to know how you want to inspire somebody who wants to do what you've been doing as a vocation. If you don't mind going first, Chris.
Oh yeah. Well, 2 things. I think you just write every single day. I don't think you can wait to be inspired. I think you have to force it. I really do think you just have to.
Do you have a goal? Do you have a writing goal every day yourself?
Yeah. I mean, it's not even a goal, but it's like hours. And I know when I've filled it, I think Graham Greene famously had 500 words a day, and then he would knock out. I try to do a little bit more than that, but whatever your goal is, I think just as long as you're sitting down for more than a half an hour and devoting yourself to moving forward, that's it. But I also think that a great story is one where it's not one you've heard before. So find a story that you don't feel like has been told that means something to you. We all learn from each other, so you learn how to write sentences from other writers. That's a great thing. You always read, but you have to find the story that no one else has told yet. So they're out there.
I love it. Joe, what's your advice for those folks?
I think of writing as the writing muscle, Chris, as being like a cement truck. You know how it always has to be turning?
Yes.
Keep the cement from drying. So that's why you have to write every day, to keep that in motion. My advice is to read a lot and discover what you like. You teach yourself to write by reading first. And then, you've got to be both courageous and receptive. You've got to be courageous enough to actually say, I'm a writer, I'm going to try this. And you also have to listen to criticism and not be knocked down by it. But sort of learn from criticism. That's good.
Gentlemen, thank you. This has been a really great chat tonight. I appreciate you coming in so late on the clock from Venice, Italy, Chris.
My pleasure.
The chance to be able to talk about the craft and to talk about the conversation with those readers, and thank you for sharing your library stories with us. I think it's important. And to Joe's advice, if you want to read a lot, how do you get the access that you need, folks? I'm going to bring it back to Library Lovers Week 2025. The work that we're doing here at Every Library, donor supported, it's to make sure that the reader can connect to the writer. The writer's got a place to have the reader discover. And if you can give us a hand at libraryloversweek.org as a donor, we'll do our level best to make sure that these political problems and these great opportunities are a point of intersection. So I'm going to thank you both again. I'm going to give you a little wave, and I'm going to put you in the green room because I want to say goodnight a little bit longer. But in the meantime, thank you for being part of Library Lovers Week, guys.
Thanks.
Good night.
So much.